vocal anatomy, understanding your voice. So as I said, strictly speaking, you don't need to know this information, but I think it's useful to have a common vocabulary when discussing the voice. And also, I think knowledge is power. So stick with me. This can get a little bit long, but I promise I'll make it as interesting as possible. So, the concept of the voice, a lot of people think of it as like an organ. I like to think of it as an instrument, a wind instrument that functions the same as any other wind instrument. We have the power of the instrument, which is the air from the lungs that vibrates the vocal folds. Then we have the source of sound, which is the vibrating vocal folds. And then we have the filter of that sound, which is the vocal tract that shapes and colors the sound. So let's just look at a few other instruments. The first one that is, for me, the most like the voice is the saxophone here, or a trumpet, or any other wind instrument. The breath is the power, okay? The reed vibrating, the little wooden reed that vibrates, that's what creates the sound. So if you take the mouthpiece off of the saxophone or the mouthpiece off the trumpet, you can still, right, make a sound. You could even use your hand. And then the filter of the sound is the body of the instrument. So we change the shape of the filter by pushing the buttons, same with the trumpet. And that's what filters that sound that's created with your mouthpiece. If we look at another instrument, this is a cello. The power is the arm that moves the bow, right? Or the bow, I guess, could be seen as the power. The vibrating strings, that's what creates the sound. And then the body of the instrument is what filters that sound. And that's why you have violins have a smaller body, they create a higher sound, and bigger basses create a bigger sound, a deeper sound. But it's of course a little bit different from our wind instrument here because we change the pitch by changing the length of the strings. And then even a drum, if the power is like your hand hitting the top of the drum, the skin, the head of the drum vibrating is what creates the sound, and then the body of the drum amplifies that sound or filters that sound. So the voice behaves exactly the same way. I want to go back to the slide just to look at it again. Power, source, filter, okay? So we are going to be looking at all three of these things right now in vocal anatomy, but also when you're then doing your vocal alteration, we're going to be thinking of altering characteristics at the level of source and at the level of the filter, and you're going to see that coming up. So let's go ahead and look at the power. Okay, so the power is the lungs. So there's not too much we need to look at on this slide. You all know how to breathe. I promise you're an expert, although I will talk about that and doing it safely next week. But there's a few things I want you to make sure that you're aware of where they're connected, right? So we have our lungs here. They're sort of in your chest. And then right here we have your trachea. So this is what leads to your lungs. So when you breathe in, air comes through your trachea and goes to your two lungs. Your larynx, which we're going to talk about on the next slide, sits right on top of your trachea, connected right there. And then it's suspended in your neck by the hyoid bone. Okay, so I've labeled it in red here. This is the hyoid bone. Fun fact, the hyoid bone is the only bone that's not connected to other bones in your body. It's just floating there. It's connected with connective tissue, but it's not connected with joints like your other bones are. So your larynx suspended from the hyoid bone and resting on top of the trachea. Okay, so that's the power, the air in your lungs. Moving on to the source. So now we've zoomed in a little bit. So this is the trachea from before, and we see the larynx sitting directly on top of it. And then this, again, in red, is the hyoid bone. So you're going to see this more clearly on the next slide, but there's basically two sections of the larynx. There's this top section that looks kind of like a saddle. Again, it'll be more clear on the next slide. And then this bottom section, which is like a ring. So the top section is called the thyroid cartilage, and the bottom section is the cricoid cartilage. And those two things together create the house of your larynx. So the source, the vibrating vocal folds live inside your larynx. And then I've also noted up here the epiglottis. So the epiglottis is like a flappy bit of cartilage that basically raises when you inhale and then lowers when you swallow. Okay, so you can have it all the way in the upper position or swallow and it's totally closing over your windpipe. Because the larynx is a fascinating little organ that does two things. It's one of the only things in the body that has like multiple responsibilities. One is it's supposed to act as a valve. So when you breathe in, it's open, and when you swallow, it's closed. So it keeps like food and saliva and liquid, whatever, out of your airway, and it creates, it's like a valve. So it either opens to your lungs or it closes so that you're moving things into your esophagus, which again you'll see on a upcoming slide. So the like part of the that creates the valve is the epiglottis. It's what determines if we're going to the lungs or we're going to the esophagus. Now, let's look at this from a different angle. So we were just looking at the larynx head on. Now we're looking at it from like this perspective, okay? So the front is here and the back is here. So it's easier to see now. The thyroid cartilage has this like saddle shape, right? And then it's sitting on top of the cricoid cartilage, which is this ring. So where is this? What's happening here? So right here at the front, we have what's called the thyroid notch. Now, sometimes you'll see this referred to as the Adam's apple, but I don't do that. I call it the thyroid notch, the laryngeal prominence, and you can feel it. So if you put your hands on the pointiest part in your neck, that is the thyroid notch. So that's this right here. Everybody has a thyroid notch. Some people's is more prominent than others, but everybody's got one, okay? Let me just move my face out of the way so you can see this better. There we go. Now, there's a few other pieces of cartilage I want to point out. These are inside the thyroid cartilage. So we've got these two little triangular pieces here, and they are called the arytenoid cartilages. And their job is to slide along the ring of the cricoid cartilage and open and close your vocal folds. So when you breathe in, they slide to like away from each other and they create that open space. And when you go to speak or phonate in any way, they slide together and bring your vocal ligaments together. The vocal ligaments are what like attach your vocal folds. You're going to see this again more closely in a different slide. But this is like basically how it works. You've got the ring, and that lets the thyroid cartilage sit there, which creates the house for those arytenoid cartilages to open and close your vocal ligaments, which control your vocal folds. Okay, so that is the cartilage. Now let's look at the actual vocal folds. We're going to go in here and look at the vocal folds. So this is what's called a coronal cross section. So if you can imagine, we've cut the head in half, okay? From the, like, you're creating two sections, like the back and the front. And we're looking from the back towards the front. So if you can imagine that thyroid notch, it's like right here, but in the background, okay? I know it's a little bit complicated. But to like situate us, we also have the thyroid cartilage. So if you remember that big saddle shape, this is like if we cut that saddle shape in half. So you've got this, and it's kind of going towards the back of the image. And then down here, if you can imagine taking a ring and chopping it in half and looking at it head on, you would only see 2 points. And that's what this is. This and this is the cricoid cartilage. Now we can see the vocal folds a little bit better. So these big muscular boys are the vocal folds. And what they do is vibrate to create sound. So a lot of people think of that like a string vibrating, but it's a little bit different. Instead, it undulates. They vibrate in this undulatory fashion. And this makes sense, right? Because if you think about it, your vocal folds have to be closed in order for you to be phonating or speaking. But then how would air be escaping if they were totally closed? And the answer is this undulation. So if you can imagine like putting your lips together and going, right? You're going, you're making like a raspberry with your lips. The air is escaping, but your lips have to be constantly in contact. So the way that they're in contact is by undulating. So that's exactly what happens here. These are the vocal folds. They're like thick muscular things. The ligaments we can't really see, but they're attached right here. And this is where sound is created. Any sound at all. And if you were just to like take your head completely off and you were just left with the vocal folds, that's what you would hear. Whee, like a little buzzy sound. Now, there's a few other pieces of vocal tissue I want to make sure you're aware of. Sometimes the vocal folds are called the true vocal folds. And that's because there's a second set of folds right here that are the vestibular folds because they're in the vestibule of the larynx. But these are often referred to as the false folds. And you can see they have this downward angle. They are not usually engaged during regular phonation. If you put your hand right here, you can feel the vibration of the true vocal folds. But if we want to feel the false folds phonate, we have to make a sound like a huff. So that's like a, right? So if you go, that's your false folds phonating. Right? You can phonate them at the same time. It's awesome. I think everyone should try it. It's really fun. The purpose of these folds typically, like we talked about, the larynx is a valve. They create a really good seal on your airway. So they, because of their downward angle, when you swallow, they come down and they really seal that airway well. And then there is the epiglottis. So it's hard to see on this diagram, but it folds like forward towards you, right, to close that airway. Okay, and then there's the space between the vocal folds is sometimes called the glottis, which is why the epiglottis is like over the glottis. And then there's one more piece of vocal tissue that's quite hard to see on this diagram, but it will come up later, and that is the aryepiglottic sphincter. So it's a ring that is like right here. And again, if you cut a ring in half and you look at it from head on, you only see 2 points, right? So that's sort of the issue with this diagram. One of its points would be here and the other would be here. And it is a piece of vocal tissue that when you engage, you get like a twangy sound, like ah, right? Like a nerd voice or something like that. That's engaging a little piece of tissue that's up higher. So those are like the three main vocal tissues that we'll like engage. I mean, we probably won't engage the false folds at all unless you really want this kind of alien sound. So maybe we will actually, now that I say it out loud. And then, yeah, so we got the aryepiglottic sphincter, the false folds, and the true vocal folds. And that's what's important on this diagram, okay, that you understand the difference between where all these things are. Oh, one more thing to help you get situated. Where the heck are these these true vocal folds? They're directly behind the thyroid notch. And the reason for that is if we go back to this slide, you can see the vocal ligaments that like hold on to your vocal folds, they're anchored on the two triangles, the arytenoid cartilages, but they're also anchored right behind the thyroid notch, right? So that's why when you place your hand on that thyroid notch, you can really feel that vibration because that's literally where those vocal folds are. So this is that anchor point, and on this diagram, that anchor point is right here, okay? So let's look at these vocal folds from the top down, all right? So this is the, let me think here. This is the front, so like closer to the front of your face. As you can see, there's that anchor point we were just talking about, that's right here. And then this is towards the back, all right? So these are the vocal ligaments. Yeah, I don't know. This is correct, but it's sort of hard to see on this diagram because we've got the false folds on top of the true folds. So it's sort of, they're like a little bit in the way here. The point is the arytenoid cartilages open, right, when you breathe in, and then these things would come together when you phonate. And then this is that other anchor point here. And then in the center, we call that the glottis. So that's what it would look like from above. And I'll leave some links to some like laryngoscope videos so you can see what this will look like in real life. I didn't include it in here for like copyright issues, but I'll link to some creators who have made laryngoscope videos if you're interested. They're kind of gnarly to watch, so make sure you're like comfortable looking at that before you click those links. Now, we've talked a lot about the source, and that's because the larynx is quite complicated. But now we're going to have one slide on the filter. And the filter is the vocal tract. So everything above the larynx is the filter. So down here I've labeled the larynx on this diagram, and you can see this is like, this point right here is, or rather, sorry, it's kind of hard to see on this diagram, but your laryngeal notch, your thyroid notch is like right here. This is the epiglottis that covers the larynx. As you can see, it's in the upward position in this diagram, which would mean that this person is breathing in, right? And if they swallowed, this epiglottis would close and cover that larynx. But remember when we talked about the power source filter. So the filter is what modifies and colors and shapes sound. So the filter in our case is the vocal tract, and it's everything from the top of the larynx all the way to our lips. So the mouth, the back of the throat, and to a lesser extent our nasal passages, but we don't have control over the size and shape of our sinuses. So we're going to stay focused on the throat and the mouth. So on this diagram, I've labeled the throat the pharynx, okay? And that is the proper whatever medical name for it. There are like different parts of the pharynx. There's the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, and the laryngopharynx. But when I'm referring to the pharynx, I'm referring to the part of the pharynx that's at the back of the mouth, the oropharynx, and the part of the pharynx that is right next to the larynx, the laryngopharynx. These two things together, I'm just going to refer to as the pharynx, because that's what we have control over the size and shape of. And then also the size and shape of the mouth, which is controlled by the height of this uvula, and also where the tongue is in the mouth, how wide your mouth is. We have a very unique instrument because unlike the saxophone, which is like fixed, and the trumpet, which is fixed, we can like move our filter, our vocal tract, in very fluid ways. And you're going to see all about this in the voice alteration overview. So that's all I'm going to say about that, okay? And we're going to leave it there for now in terms of vocal anatomy. I will like continue to bring it up throughout the course, but now you have like a common vocabulary with me. If you want a little more information, I've got 2 downloads for you that I recommend checking out. The first one is this ebook, Learn How Your Voice Works, and it's an illustrated guide to transvocal anatomy. And it goes through like the same sort of thing that we talked about today, but it's just maybe a little bit easier to process in book forms. If you want that, you can download it right now in the download section. And then I also have the vocal anatomy coloring book, which is these same anatomy drawings, but with the color removed. So if you want to spend time like relaxing and coloring in and really like focusing on the different parts of the anatomy, you can do that here. So get those whenever you're ready, and they will always be available for free on my website anyway. So if you forget to download them today, you can download them at a later time. And that's it for vocal anatomy. So we're going to move on to the next lesson, which is the voice alteration overview. Remember, as I said, this module is very information heavy, so take a break, maybe wait till tomorrow to we'll look at the voice alteration overview, process things, take your time, and then when you're ready, we can jump right into the next lesson. I'll see you there.